The prestigious Galactic Academy of Physical Excellence prided itself on being the most diverse educational institution in the known universe. Their brochure available in 47,328 different formats, including telepathic transmission and interpretive dance, boasted about accommodating students from every gravity level, atmospheric composition, and state of matter. Well, almost every state of matter. They'd had to politely decline that one plasma-based applicant after the unfortunate incident with the quantum locker room. However, today, the normally peaceful halls of the Academy's physical education complex were buzzing with an entirely different kind of energy. And by buzzing, we mean literal buzzing, since about a third of the student body communicated through various forms of vibrations. "I heard they can accelerate from 0 to full speed without using any gravitational assists," whispered Blorp T, their gelatinous form quivering with excitement and causing nearby crystals to resonate sympathetically. "That's nothing," Whistletoon chirped, their feathers ruffling in agitation. "My third cousin's roommate's nutritional supplier once met a human who could continue moving for hours without entering suspended animation." "Hours," Crystalia chimed in, their crystalline structure briefly flashing with shock-induced bioluminescence. "But that's not possible, right?" In his office, Professor X427 was having what his species called a molt-worthy crisis. The distinguished instructor, whose exoskeleton bore the prestigious marks of 17 different physical education certifications, was frantically updating the Academy's safety protocols for the 17,000th time that morning. "Computer," he clicked, his mandibles twitching nervously. "Add another layer of quantum cushioning to Training Arena 7, and double-check the emergency teleporters, and maybe triple the strength of the gravity stabilizers, and—" "Professor," the AI interrupted with what could only be described as digital exasperation, "may I remind you that we've already upgraded all safety measures beyond maximum recommended levels. Any further modifications might actually create more hazards than they prevent." "But you don't understand," X427 waved all four of his upper appendages in distress. "We're getting a human. A real, living, breathing Deathworlder. Do you know what they do for fun on their planet? They jump out of perfectly functional atmospheric vehicles. They willingly submerge themselves in dihydrogen monoxide. They. His voice dropped to a horrified whisper. "They even practice something called parkour." The AI, being a sophisticated quantum computer capable of processing millions of scenarios per nanosecond, wisely chose to remain silent. Meanwhile, in the main gymnasium, Vaporia was demonstrating their species' unique approach to physical education by dispersing their gaseous form through an obstacle course designed to test molecular cohesion. They were just reforming at the finish line when they caught drift of the latest rumor. Is it true they condensed rapidly, forming words in 17 different atmospheric layers simultaneously? The Deathworlder arrives today. The growing crowd of students, representing species from across the galaxy, all turned their various sensory organs toward the gymnasium's main entrance. The chronometric devices were counting down to the start of first period, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, a transport ship was carrying their new classmate, a genuine, gravity-defying, endurance running. Parkour practicing human. The tension in the gymnasium could have been cut with a plasma knife if anyone had dared to activate such a potentially dangerous device in the presence of the impending arrival. The door slid open with an anticlimactic whoosh, and several gaseous students accidentally diffused themselves in surprise. Kai Rodriguez walked in, carrying a standard-issue gym bag and wearing what appeared to be to the horror of many tight-fitting exercise clothing that left their arms exposed. The human paused, looking around the gymnasium with an expression of interest that several species interpreted as a predatory threat display. "Sweet setup you've got here," Kai said, completely unaware that their casual voice had caused 3 crystalline students to vibrate in sympathetic resonance. "The anti-grav zones are a nice touch." Professor X427's mandibles clicked rapidly as he consulted his 17-page safety briefing. "Ah, yes, welcome. I trust you've been properly decontaminated and have signed all 47 liability waivers." "Yeah, took care of that this morning," Kai replied, stretching their arms above their head in what was absolutely not meant to be a threatening gesture but nevertheless caused Blorp D to instinctively split into 3 defensive smaller blobs. "Though I've got to say, the waiver about unexpected atmospheric protein dispersal was a new one." That's for if you sneeze, the professor explained hastily. We've installed special filters and containment fields after researching your species' involuntary particle expulsion mechanism. A ripple of horror passed through the assembled students. They expel particles Whistletoon's feathers puffed out to twice their normal size, involuntarily. Oh man, wait until they find out about yawning, Kai muttered under their breath, unfortunately loud enough for several students with enhanced auditory perception to overhear. The resulting wave of worried whispers about voluntary jaw dislocation took several minutes to subside. Now then, Professor Zex 427 continued, trying to maintain some semblance of order. Perhaps you could demonstrate your species' basic locomotion capabilities. At your own comfort level, of course. We've prepared a specially reinforced track with emergency gravity dampeners. Kai looked at the track, which appeared to have been designed to withstand a small nuclear explosion. You want me to run? If you feel it would be safe to do so, the professor added quickly. We understand that your species requires periodic rest intervals and... Before he could finish, Kai had already started jogging around the track at what they considered a very modest pace. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. By the sacred gases, Vaporia exclaimed, condensing rapidly in shock. Look at the bilateral locomotion, the perpetual falling and catching, the controlled momentum. They're not even using anti-grav assists, Crystalia chimed in, their structure flickering with excitement and anxiety. How are they generating forward momentum through simple appendage manipulation? Kai, who had now completed several laps, came to a stop in front of the professor. A new wave of panic rippled through the crowd as several students noticed something horrifying. Professor Blorp T quivered urgently. The human is leaking. Leaking. Kai touched their forehead, realizing they had worked up a light sweat. Oh, this is normal. It's just how we regulate our temperature. They can manipulate their thermal regulation through liquid expulsion. Whistletoon's beak clacked in astonishment. But that's so inefficient, so primitive, so... Metal breathed a small, cybernetic student in the back, earning several confused looks from their classmates. Professor Zix 427 frantically consulted his notes. Yes, this is documented. Humans utilize an evaporative cooling system. The liquid is mostly harmless dihydrogen monoxide with trace minerals. Mostly harmless, the three parts of Blorp the merged back together in nervous solidarity. What do you mean mostly? Kai couldn't help but grin, which unfortunately displayed their teeth and caused another minor panic. This was going to be an interesting semester. After the initial shock of human locomotion had somewhat subsided, Professor Zex 427 decided to proceed with standard warm-up exercises. In theory, this would be the safest part of the class. In theory. Let us begin with basic flexibility maintenance, the professor announced, his exoskeleton creaking slightly as he demonstrated a simple articulation of his mid-segments. Each species will perform their traditional preparatory movements. Kai nodded and dropped into a casual forward bend, touching their toes. The gymnasium erupted into chaos. Emergency. Emergency. Crystalia's voice rang out in harmonic distress. The Deathworlder is breaking itself in half. By the sacred void, they're deliberately compromising their structural integrity. Vaporia condensed into a tight, anxious cloud. Professor, shouldn't we activate the medical teleporters? Everyone, please remain calm. Professor Zex 427 clicked rapidly, though his own mandibles were chattering. The human species possesses unusual skeletal flexibility. This is apparently normal behavior. Normal. Whistletoon's feathers were now so puffed out they resembled a spherical mass of fluff with eyes. How can voluntary spinal deformation be normal? Kai straightened up, trying not to laugh. Wait until they see a back bend, they muttered under their breath, unfortunately loud enough for several students' enhanced auditory organs to pick up. A back bend. Blorp the split into worried droplets again. Their exoskeleton can bend backwards. We don't actually have an exoskeleton, Kai explained helpfully, which turned out to be exactly the wrong thing to say. The resulting panic took 15 minutes to subside, during which time 3 emergency containment fields were accidentally activated, and the Academy's AI had to play soothing quantum harmonics through the speaker system. Once relative calm was restored, the class moved on to respiratory exercises. Each species had their own unique way of processing their preferred atmospheric compounds. The crystalline students absorbed trace elements through their lattice structure. The gaseous students performed elegant molecular diffusion patterns. Blorp these kind simply osmosed what they needed through their membrane. Then Kai took a deep breath. What is that sound? Whistletoon's head tilted at an alarming angle. Is that some kind of warning signal? It's just breathing, Kai said, exhaling slowly. This somehow made things worse. They're actively pumping atmosphere through an internal cavity. Vaporia dispersed in horror. Multiple times per minute. Approximately 12 to 20 times per minute at rest, the professor added, consulting his notes. The rate can increase significantly during physical activity. But why does it sound so? Crystalia's structure vibrated with distress. Terrifying, suggested Blorp T. Prehistoric, offered Whistletoon. Awesome, whispered the cybernetic student in the back, who was taking notes with suspicious enthusiasm. The situation reached its peak when they moved on to cardiovascular warm-ups. Kai began doing some light jumping jacks, a simple enough exercise that somehow managed to violate about 17 different alien concepts of proper movement. They're deliberately launching themselves away from the ground, Crystalia chimed in panic, without anti-grav assistance. And landing again. Repeatedly, Vaporia swirled in agitation. The impact forces alone should. Oh no, Blorp D quivered. The liquid excretion is increasing. Indeed, Kai was now sweating more noticeably, tiny droplets visible on their skin. A team of miniature maintenance bots immediately deployed to analyze the chemical composition of any stray drops that hit the floor, while several students engaged their atmospheric filtration shields. Fascinating, hummed the Academy's AI through the speakers. The human's cooling mechanism is actually quite efficient for their mass to surface area ratio. Though the sodium chloride content in the excretion is rather concerning. Sodium chloride. Whistletoon's beak clacked rapidly. As in salt? They're excreting salt. Like some kind of biological weapon. It's just sweat, Kai protested, stopping their exercises. It's perfectly normal. Look, they wiped their forehead with their arm, causing several nearby students to recoil in horror. Professor X427 quickly intervened. Perhaps we should move on to individual species-appropriate exercises. Kai, there's a reinforced section over there designed to withstand. Accommodate human physical activities. Cool, Kai said, heading toward the designated area. Mind if I do some burpees? Burpees. Crystalia's voice hit a frequency that made several light fixtures flicker. Is that some kind of human combat technique? Not exactly, Kai grinned, then demonstrated one perfect burpee. The gymnasium's emergency protocols activated automatically, interpreting the sudden up-down movement as some kind of localized seismic event. 3 different force fields deployed, the gravity stabilizers kicked into overdrive, and somewhere in the administrative wing, a printer spontaneously began producing incident reports. This Professor X427 clicked weakly, watching as his carefully planned lesson dissolved into chaos, might require a complete revision of our physical education curriculum. Meanwhile, the cybernetic student had filled 17 data tablets with observations and was now sending excited updates to what appeared to be a blog titled Deathworlder Fitness. Extreme exercise or performance art. The Academy's main gymnasium had been transformed into what Professor X427 proudly called the Universal Adaptability Challenge course. In reality, it looked more like someone had asked 17 different species to build obstacle courses, then smashed them all together and hoped for the best. Now then, the professor clicked, his mandibles significantly steadier after consuming what passed for anxiety medication in his species. Each section is calibrated for different gravitational preferences and physical capabilities. Vaporia, perhaps you could demonstrate the standard route. The gaseous student dispersed elegantly, flowing through a series of increasingly complex molecular diffusion barriers. They reformed at the end with a flourish that briefly ionized the surrounding air. Excellent, Professor X427 chittered. Crystalia, would you show us the solid-state approach? The crystalline student chimed melodiously, refracting light in complex patterns as they navigated a series of quantum tunneling points and crystal lattice alignment challenges. Blorp T demonstrated the amorphous route by splitting, flowing, and recombining through a maze of selective permeable membranes, while Whistletoon showcased aerial maneuvers through anti-gravity hoops. And finally, the professor gestured to a section that looked like it had been designed by someone with a profound misunderstanding of human limitations. We have the Earth gravity zone. Kai, you may attempt. Kai was already moving. What happened next would be uploaded to the Galactic Educational Network under 17 different titles, ranging from Deathworlder defies physics to proof that humans are actually quantum anomalies. Instead of using the carefully calibrated gravity assists, Kai sprinted straight at the first obstacle, a 3-meter wall. The collective gasp from the alien students created a brief vacuum pocket in the gym. They're going to impact, Crystalia vibrated in horror. Quick, someone activate the emergency. Kai planted one foot on the wall, pushed up, grabbed the top, and vaulted over in one fluid motion. Did they just use gravitational forces against gravity? Vaporia condensed so rapidly they briefly achieved liquid state. But Kai wasn't done. They landed in a roll, causing several students to emit distress signals at what they assumed was a catastrophic structural failure, and smoothly transitioned into a series of movements that seemed to casually ignore most laws of physics. Precision jumps between platforms that the safety committee had spaced impossibly far apart, swinging under bars using only their upper appendages. Something called a Kong vault that made Professor Zex 427's exoskeleton molt slightly in stress. Are you recording this? Whistletoon's feathers whirred excitedly. My entire migration flock will never believe. Already streaming, the cybernetic student responded. Their optical sensors zoomed in to capture every movement. My followers are going crazy. Someone just asked if humans have internal anti-gravity organs. Kai flowed through the course like water, a comparison that made Blorp TE very uncomfortable, treating vertical surfaces as suggestions rather than barriers. They used momentum in ways that made the Academy's physics department send down an automated inquiry. Notice how they're not even using the designated rest points, Professor Zex 427 noted weakly, watching as Kai ignored the carefully placed recovery stations. Their species can maintain continuous movement for. Professor Crystalia chimed in concern as the instructor's mandibles clicked rapidly. I just realized, he chittered faintly. We haven't even activated the enhanced gravity section yet. That was all in standard Earth gravity. The gymnasium erupted in electromagnetic chaos as several electronic devices short-circuited from their owner's shock. Kai reached the end of the course, barely breathing hard, and turned to face the class. The sight of their slightly elevated respiratory rate visible in the movement of their chest caused 3 more students to activate their emergency protocols. That was fun, Kai grinned, wiping some sweat from their forehead with casual disregard for the horror it induced. Mind if I try it again? I think I saw some better lines I could take through the middle section. Better lines? Vaporia swirled in confusion. You mean there are more efficient ways to violate gravitational norms? Oh yeah, Kai nodded enthusiastically. Like that wall section. You could totally cat pass that instead of going over the top. Much faster. Cat pass? Professor Zex 427 frantically consulted his xenobiology database. Is this some form of feline-human hybrid technique? Nah, it's just parkour terminology. Here, let me show you. Wait, the professor clicked hastily. Perhaps we should review the safety protocols first, and reinforce the structural integrity fields, and update my insurance policy. But the students had other ideas. The cybernetic student stream had gone viral across 17 different quantum networks. Comments were flooding in from across the galaxy, and several prestigious physics institutions were demanding frame-by-frame analysis of the human's movements. Could you demonstrate that thing you did with the bars again? Whistletoon asked, all previous fear apparently forgotten in the face of scientific curiosity. My quantum mechanics professor doesn't believe the footage is real. The spin move? Kai asked. Sure, that's just a basic underbar. Though I could show you a castaway if you want something really cool. Professor Crystalia chimed urgently. We need to document this for the Academy archives. This completely revolutionizes our understanding of bipedal locomotion. And thermal regulation, Blorpty added, having finally gathered the courage to reform into a single mass. They've been moving for several minutes, and the liquid excretion system is functioning perfectly. Professor Zex 427 watched as his carefully structured lesson plan dissolved into what was rapidly becoming an impromptu parkour demonstration. The safety systems were working overtime. The Academy's AI was processing movement data faster than ever before, And somewhere in the administrative wing, the printer had run out of paper for incident reports. Very well, he clicked resignedly. But please, for the love of all stable molecular structures, no more surprise movements. My exoskeleton can't take much more molting today. Kai just smiled, already eyeing up the impossible gaps between platforms with an expression that humans would recognize as the universal challenge accepted face. The alien students, not yet familiar with this particular human expression, continued recording eagerly, blissfully unaware of what was about to unfold. The Academy's insurance adjusters, however, felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to update their policies. Everything had been going surprisingly well, all things considered. The emergency protocols had only activated 12 times, which Professor Xenophysical 427 was counting as a win. Then came what would forever be known in Academy history as the incident. It started innocently enough. Kai was helping Crystalia understand the concept of momentum conservation through practical demonstration, while the rest of the class maintained what they considered a safe observation distance approximately 3 times the recommended evacuation radius. So you see, Kai explained, casually holding a training weight that the Academy used for high-gravity environment conditioning. It's all about controlling the transfer of. They paused, face scrunching up in an unfamiliar way. Professor Xenophysical 427's threat detection sensors went into overdrive. Everyone, assume emergency positions. The human's facial structure is experiencing unexpected reconfiguration. No, it's fine, Kai managed to say. I just need to achoo. The sneeze echoed through the gymnasium like a small explosion. The training weight, which Kai had instinctively moved to cover their mouth, crumpled like tissue paper in their grip. 17 different emergency systems activated simultaneously. Atmospheric contamination detected. Unregistered particle dispersal. Structural integrity compromised. Unauthorized metal deformation. Quantum anomaly in sectors 7 through 12. The Academy's AI, trying to handle the cascade of alerts, began speaking in 17 languages at once, none of them particularly reassuring. Vaporia dispersed into a panic so complete they briefly achieved plasma state. Crystalia's structure resonated at a frequency that shattered 3 nearby light fixtures. Whistletoon's feathers molted instantaneously, creating what looked like a localized snowstorm of iridescent down. Oh geez, I'm so sorry, Kai said, still holding the mangled weight. I didn't mean to. They looked down at the crushed metal in their hands. Oh no. They deformed, reinforced Xenosteel Blorp T had divided into so many smaller droplets that they were basically a fine mist, with their bare manipulator appendages. During an involuntary spasm, the cybernetic student, who had somehow maintained their composure, was transmitting everything with a caption that read, "Breaking human demonstrates previously theoretical strength levels while expelling atmospheric particles." Professor Xenophysical 427's exoskeleton had gone from its usual professional sheen to a distinctly pale, almost translucent state. The protocols we need to the containment fields. He never finished the sentence because the Academy's automated defense systems chose that moment to deploy everything. All at once. Decontamination fields sprang up in geometric patterns. Gravity stabilizers kicked into reverse. Anti-particle scrubbers engaged at maximum power. The emergency ventilation system activated with enough force to create localized weather patterns. Kai stood in the middle of it all, still holding the crumpled weight, looking increasingly mortified as chaos erupted around them. I really should have mentioned I have allergies. Allergies, the professor's translator nearly shorted out trying to convey the pitch of his clicks. You mean this can happen again? The decontamination spray made Kai's nose tickle. Their expression changed. Oh no, they managed to say. Secondary episode imminent, screeched the Academy's AI. All units brace for. Achoo. This time, Kai's sneeze coincided with a gravity fluctuation from the malfunctioning stabilizers. The combined effect launched them a half-meter into the air. They landed perfectly fine, humans being surprisingly good at unexpected aerial maneuvers, but the display of unintentional acrobatics proved too much for the already stressed observers. Crystalia went into emergency stasis. Whistletoon achieved escape velocity from the designated exercise area. The remains of Blorp's form had to be collected with specialized equipment, usually reserved for quantum fluid dynamics experiments. The cybernetic student's transmission cut off abruptly as their systems initiated an automatic reboot to handle the sensory overload. Their last broadcast simply read error reality exceeds expected parameters. Professor Xenophysical 427, showing the crisis management skills that had earned him 17 teaching certifications, did the only reasonable thing: he activated the gymnasium's total containment protocol. Unfortunately, he'd forgotten that he'd upgraded it that morning. The resulting sequence of safety measures turned the entire room into what could only be described as a cross between a decontamination chamber, a zero-gravity zone, and a particularly enthusiastic cleaning service. Kai, now floating in the middle of the chaos, still clutching the mangled weight and trying desperately not to sneeze again, managed to sum up the situation perfectly. So, anyone want to explain to the headmaster why the gym looks like it's been hit by 17 different types of apocalypse? The Academy's AI, in what might have been either a glitch or a remarkable display of situational awareness, began playing what sounded suspiciously like funeral music through the still-functioning speakers. Somewhere in the administrative wing, the incident report printer spontaneously combusted. In the aftermath of the incident, something unexpected happened. Instead of increasing the already astronomical number of safety protocols, the Academy witnessed what Professor Xenophysical 427 would later describe in his academic paper as unprecedented interspecies adaptation through mutual terror management. It started with Crystalia, who had emerged from emergency stasis with an unusual perspective. They chimed thoughtfully, their structure vibrating at what passed for a contemplative frequency. The human's particle expulsion system is actually quite similar to my species' pressure release mechanism. Really, Kai asked, now wearing what the Academy officially termed a Class 17 particle containment device, which looked suspiciously like a regular face mask with extra blinking lights. Oh yes, when our crystal matrix becomes oversaturated, we also expel excess material. Though ours tends to spawn new geometric formations rather than cause gymnasium-wide panic. Fascinating, hummed the cybernetic student, who had not only recovered from their emergency reboot, but had gained 17 new followers interested in extreme xenobiology. Whistletune, having been coaxed down from the ceiling struts, added their own observation. And their bipedal locomotion, while terrifying, is remarkably efficient. Did you know they can maintain directional movement even while processing visual data from multiple angles, without once entering a collision course with stationary objects? Most of the time, Kai added with a grin, which no longer caused immediate panic since the class had learned to distinguish between human threat displays and genuine expressions of amusement. Even Blorp T, finally reassembled into a single cohesive mass, found common ground. Their liquid cooling system, while primitive, shows remarkable evolutionary problem solving, though I still maintain that osmotic regulation is clearly superior. Hey, at least I don't have to split into 17 pieces when I'm surprised, Kai teased, causing Blorp Thee to ripple in what might have been the gelatinous equivalent of a chuckle. Professor Xenophysical 427 watched this exchange with his mandibles clicked together in what his species recognized as amazement. The security feeds showed students from different gravitational backgrounds actually choosing to spend their free time in the gym, exchanging knowledge about their various physical capabilities. Vaporia had taken to trying to mimic human movements through gaseous form manipulation, creating what they called atmospheric parkour. Crystalia was experimenting with new ways to refract light based on human cardiovascular patterns. The cybernetic student had started a cross-species fitness blog that was gaining popularity across 17 star systems. Perhaps the professor mused, watching as Kai taught a group of interested students about something called yoga with only minimal emergency protocol activation. We've been approaching xenophysical education all wrong. The Academy's AI, which had finally stopped playing emergency alert sounds every time Kai moved suddenly, seemed to agree. It had started compiling data on what it termed adaptive cross-species physical enhancement methodologies, though everyone else just called it the human way. It's quite simple, really, Kai explained to their growing circle of friends. Every species has their strengths. I mean, Vaporia can literally become one with the air. Crystalia can bend light. Blorp D can change shape at will. And Whistletune can achieve perfect aerial rotation without even thinking about it. We humans just happen to be good at, well, surviving things that probably should have killed us. And destroying exercise equipment, added the professor dryly, still keeping the replacement xenosteel weights in a reinforced quantum storage unit. And that, Kai admitted with another grin. But hey, at least I haven't sneezed in almost 17 minutes. The entire class instinctively activated their personal shield generators, but this time, the action was accompanied by what could only be described as fond exasperation. They were learning, adapting, growing. And if the occasional emergency protocol still activated when Kai demonstrated a particularly impressive feat of human physicality, well, that's what insurance was for .by the end of the semester. The Galactic Academy of Physical Excellence had undergone what the educational boards termed a statistically improbable improvement in cross-species physical development in reality. This meant that Kai had accidentally revolutionized the entire concept of xenophysical education. The new adaptive movement program, officially termed Protocol H17 Enhanced Multi-Species Physical Integration Through Controlled Chaos, became the most popular course in the Academy's history. Students from 17 different gravitational backgrounds signed up to learn what they called the human way of physical activity. Professor Zix 427, now sporting the distinguished marks of a pioneering educator and several new stress molts, had appointed Kai as his teaching assistant. The insurance companies had finally stopped crying, mostly because the Academy's unprecedented success had made them all incredibly wealthy. Remember, Kai would tell each new class, standing in the now heavily reinforced gymnasium, every species moves differently, but we all have something to teach each other, even if that something is how to properly deploy emergency protocols in under 3 seconds. The Cybernetic Students blog had evolved into the galaxy's leading resource for xenophysical education, with 17 million subscribers eagerly awaiting each new post about Deathworlder training techniques. Try at your own risk. And if the Academy's emergency response systems were still a bit trigger-happy whenever someone sneezed, well, some things never change. They just get better insurance coverage.